Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Futsal868 Corner Talks. My name is Geoffrey Edwards, series moderator and president of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago. Futsal868 Corner Talks is an online meetup series where global sporting professionals meet. Today is the final episode of the four-part series entitled Jeux Olympiques, an educational and insightful conversation on thought-provoking topics around the Olympic Games, which officially began 2 days ago, Friday the 23rd of July, and ends on the 6th of August, 2021. As a sports lover, and I mean lover, my very first memory of the Summer Olympic Games was Seoul 1988. The marquee event of the 24th Olympiad was the 100-meter men's final. The race was won by Canadian sprinter Benjamin Sinclair Johnson in world record time as well, 9.79 seconds. Second was US favorite Carl Johnson. Within 24 hours of victory, Ben was stripped of the gold medal due to a failed drug test when traces of a banned substance, steroid, was found in his urine. The race, by many, is considered one of the most infamous and fascinating moments in the game's history. Imagine that being my first. One historian called it the dirtiest race ever ran. Since then, there has been many doping scandals at every single Olympics. Let's put some balance into this discussion. The anti-doping industry has become a lot better at what it has done since the establishment of the World Anti-Doping Agency, RADO, in 2000, and the introduction of the World Anti-Doping Code in 2001. Revisions of the World Anti-Doping Code came into force in 2009, 2015, and 2021. Today, in episode 62, we discuss anti-doping. Our guest is Dr. Sasha Sutherland, Executive Director at the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Agency. We want to say thank you very much, Dr. Sutherland, for joining us.
Hi, John.
We here.
We made it.
If we spend a couple of minutes, guys, to let you all know, I have been speaking to Dr. Sutherland for over a month now. Dr. Sutherland probably could be more than that. And it's literally by the grace of God, everything has happened to what it is. Dr. Sutherland was the first confirmed guest for Jeux Olympiques, the series. And it just so happened that the technical difficulties tried to stop her from being on the show this afternoon. But again, we made it resilient.
We made it. We are resilient. And as you said, by the grace of God, it happened. Thank God for teenagers.
Oh, well, of course. You have to give a shout out to the teenager who assisted. And let's take the time for you to shout out some teenagers or young persons who are doing really well in the Olympics. Let's give you that time.
The Caribbean is representing. Canok has on Twitter, the Caribbean is bringing the vibes. And I just want to send a message to every single athlete who's representing the Caribbean, from Barbados, where we're headquartered, Trinidad and Tobago, BVI, Cayman, St. Lucia, Grenada, Guyana, Suriname. Every one of our member country representatives, Cayman Islands, you are doing us proud. We are seeing you guys. We see you working hard. We see you breaking national records. We see you, breaking records in for your countries. And we see you representing not just your island territories or not just your country. If you're talking about Guyana and Suriname on the continent, you're representing the Caribbean well, and we are proud of you.
What a way to start it. And it's really and truly true. I mean, yes, we have had 3 thought-provoking, some may say controversial topics. That is the Jeux Olympiques, starting off with Article 50, and we had the chairman of the Caribbean Association of National Olympics, Mr. Brian Lewis, starting off this conversation, and to be able to end it with you with such a great moment that you just shared with us is really mind-blowing, to say the least. For me, knowing where the team would have gone through in terms of putting this series together. So thank you very much for that, because we definitely need that positive vibe, and we definitely need to be able to lift up, before the grace of God, all our athletes who have spent the last 5 years, not 4, but 5 years, given the fact the Olympics are supposed to be last year,
Yes.
to be able to represent their country, and the sacrifices that they and their families have made is quite amazing, to say the least. So let's get straight into it, Doc. And with that being said, I'm going to pull up, I'm going to share the screen and pull up your presentation as it may be. But while I'm doing that, please tell us this whole aspect as regards to doping and anti-doping. What is doping, and why do we need to fight doping? Considering that I would have mentioned my very first memory of the Olympics, 1988. I'm 7 years. Everybody's talking Carl Lewis, and then you have this Jamaican-born Canadian sprinter in the name of Ben Johnson, who just is ripped. He looks like He-Man, as a young man, a black He-Man, and he is pumping those arms, striding all the way down 100-meter, and he won. And not did he just win, but he won in record time. And you seeing the antagonism of the US media. Yes, even at that age I saw it. You're seeing Carl Lewis upset. But he won. But later in 24 hours, he was stripped because of this situation called doping.
Yes.
What is doping, and why is anti-doping even exist?
So firstly, I want to say that what we do is important, because every athlete, if you go to the third slide, every athlete has a right to clean sport. This is the reason why we do what we do. Every athlete who participates in sport deserves a level playing field, deserves to know that when they sacrifice, that their victory is an integritous one. And so when we ask, what is doping? We go by the World Anti-Doping Code. So another myth buster. The code is not the World Anti-Doping Agency's code. It's not WADA's code. It's the World Anti-Doping Code. And why we say the World Anti-Doping Code is because over 650 organizations have signed on as signatories to this document, saying we are going to abide by the rules, we are going to play true and play fair, we are going to implement policies and regulations to ensure our athletes do not dope, as outlined in Article 2.1 to 2.11 of the code. And so doping is the occurrence of one or more of the anti-doping rule violations set forth in Article 2 of the code. And if you go to the next slide, we have a nice little pictograph that shows what is doping. Doping can be the presence of a substance. By far, that's the most popular when we talk about anti-doping rule violations. It can be the presence of a substance in an athlete's sample after they've been tested. It can be the use or the attempted use of a prohibited substance or method. It can be an athlete refusing to be tested, evading or failing to submit to sample collection after they've been notified by what is called the doping control officer. It can be an athlete's failure to submit whereabouts information or missing their test if they're part of what is called a registered testing pool. That's when you get to the elite level and your international federation or your national federation wants to ensure they test you consistently to make sure you are not taking prohibited substances. And so they ask you to submit whereabouts information about where you live, where you train, 1 hour that they will be able to always find you to do testing. So if you fail to file that information in the anti-doping administrative and management system called ADAMS, or also known as ADAMS, any combination of 2 or 3 failure to submit the information or missing a test can be an anti-doping rule violation. ADRVs, or anti-doping rule violation. It might also be tampering or attempting to tamper with any part of the doping control process. It might be the possession of a prohibited substance or method. It might be trafficking or attempting to traffic the prohibited substance or method, administering or attempted administering of a prohibited method or substance to an athlete. It might be your complicity in another anti-doping rule violation. So you may not have done it, but you've colluded with someone. And it might be prohibited association with sanctioned athlete support personnel or athletes. Under the 2021 code, a new article was added, Article 2.11, which says that an anti-doping rule violation might occur if someone tries to discourage or retaliate against reporting doping to the authorities. So many of us would have heard about whistleblower protection over the last few years. And so that Article 2.11 deals specifically with whistleblowers, people who know something askew is going on, they want to report it, but someone is threatening them or antagonizing them. So you're hampering part of the process, and you may be subject to an anti-doping rule violation. So that is in a nutshell, the 11 tenets, or what constitutes doping according to the World Anti-Doping Code. Now you ask, why fight doping? I'm going back to that first slide, because every athlete has a right to participate in clean sport, right? More importantly, found in the code, in the preamble, that where we speak about the purpose of the code and why it exists, the scope and organization of the World Anti-Doping Program and their related rationale, there are three things listed: that we want to protect the athlete's fundamental right to participate in doping-free sport and thus promote health, fairness, and equality for all athletes worldwide. We also want to provide the opportunity for athletes to pursue human excellence without the use of performance-enhancing substances or methods. And when we talk about pursuing human excellence, we're talking about pursuing sporting excellence. So from a philosophical standpoint, we know that sport was created because humankind loved obstacles and they like overcoming obstacles. So that idea in the code is related to that pursuing excellence in whatever you do. Finally, another reason why we fight doping is because we want to maintain the integrity of and the spirit of sport in terms of respect for rules and other competitors. Again, another philosophical concept. You know, when you talk to philosophy sports students, they talk about this thing called zero-sum logic. The fact that in every game or in every activity, you're going to have a winner and you're going to have a loser. And zero-sum logic allows, the winner allows that loser to try again, to come again in the next Olympiad and see if you can take that victory from me. And so in creating and maintaining the integrity of sport and fair competition, we also want to level the playing field and ensure that there's a value of clean sport to the world. So when we talk about these three things, that's why we do what we do. That's why you have this anti-doping program and why we try to talk more about clean sport to make it positive awareness for athletes and athlete support personnel. And if you just allow me, I would say that the spirit of sport is a celebration of the human spirit, mind, and body. And that is argued as the essence of Olympism, which is reflected in purported Olympic values like respect, excellence, friendship, fair play, teamwork, dedication, and community. So what we do in anti-doping is not removed from sport. It's not off in the distance somewhere. Quite the contrary, it's the foundation. It underpins what we're witnessing on our televisions in the next 2 weeks. Athletes pursuing human excellence and athletes who are medaling having the right to participate in clean sport, knowing that when someone wins a gold medal, that victory is a true victory. They've done it by their natural inclinations and with no performance-enhancing substances or methods.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because the definition by the IOC 1967's Medical Commission states the definition of doping as the use of substances or techniques in any form or quantity alien or unnatural to the body with the exclusive aim of obtaining an artificial or unfair increase in performance in competition. So that's extremely pertinent in terms of just summarizing exactly what you have said. And the WADA, the ex-WADA president 2015, Sir Greg Reedy, would have stated, For the anti-doping community, doping threatens the very integrity of what remains so important. Using your words, clean, fair sport, competing on a level playing field, that is, sport that allows talent and dedication to prosper, not sport that involves the use of prohibited substances or methods.
Yeah.
So now it leads us to the question of, in your title, you are the executive director of this agency called Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization. And then we have WADA. Who are these stakeholders in this whole conversation of anti-doping?
Yes. So if you pull up the next slide, an overview of the system, we can share with the participants this afternoon. So as I said, a number of organizations have signed on to this document, this code that will govern the way we participate in sports, ensure it remains clean. And so WADA, whose mission is to lead a collaborative worldwide movement for doping-free sport, is the international independent organization that was created in 1999, as you said, to promote, coordinate, and monitor doping and monitor the fight against doping in all its forms. So WADA is the independent international stakeholder. So they look at everyone competing in sport, whether that's the International Federation, National Federation, national anti-doping organizations, athletes, athlete support personnel, etc. And they help to harmonize the efforts for maintaining clean sport internationally. So under the code in Article 20, from 20.7.1 to I think it's about 20.7.11, it outlines what WADA is supposed to do. And I'm just going to read a few of those things so that people are clear what these different entities do. So WADA, as an independent agency, monitors compliance with the code. So they would monitor compliance with Trinidad and Tobago, for example, with Barbados as countries and what they're doing through their national Olympic committees, through the national sport federations, etc. They will provide support and guidance to signatories if they're not meeting those benchmarks to ensure that their efforts comply with the code and its 8 international standards and supporting guidelines and documentation. They monitor that compliance also to ensure that the compliance mechanisms are met according to Article 20.1 of the World Anti-Doping Code. They also approve the international standards that are applicable to the implementation of the World Anti-Doping Code. They accredit laboratories. So when you take a sample from an athlete, a lot of people kind of question, well, where's my sample going? And how do I know it's not, any arbitrary person testing? All the labs that are used, there are over 30 of them internationally, they're accredited by the World Anti-Doping Agency, and that is a laborious process. And so again, that is to ensure the integrity of samples that are sent to the lab. Of course, no agency or no lab is foolproof, but to the best of their ability, they tend to accredit and reaccredit laboratories to conduct sample analysis and approve others to conduct sample analysis to maintain a level playing field. They also develop and publish guidelines and models of best practice, again, to support organizations who may not have the resources or the institutions that can do things like whether it's legislation or setting policies or, enacting anti-doping rules, etc. We have this year the Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act, which complies with the athletes' rights and responsibilities under the code and the international standard. And so they submit new documentation and new acts like these for approval to the WADA Executive Committee. They promote, conduct, commission, fund, and coordinate anti-doping research in every region. And one of the most important international standards that we have this year is the International Standard of Education. And it just goes back to what you said in your preamble, Geoffrey, that your first introduction to the world of anti-doping was because of this test that this superhuman would have taken, and it returned what is called an adverse analytical finding or positive test. The idea behind the 2021 code is that no athlete should be first introduced to anti-doping through testing. Quite the contrary, we should build values-based education as it relates to sports. And we have a number of agencies who already use sport to promote, whether it's social justice or to promote positive values in society. And so the International Standard of Education aims to introduce athletes to this whole concept of clean sport and fair play and a level playing field through education programs rendered at national games, rendered at schools, in school curricula, etc. And so, among other things, WADA is there just to direct the anti-doping fight internationally. When you talk about the Caribbean RADO, the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization, what we do is we act as the regional secretariat for clean sport in the Caribbean. We have 18 member countries, but we also collaborate with countries who are not members of the RADO, but want to partner to do anti-doping programming. And so our vision in the Caribbean is to have a region that's unified and committed to clean sport. And as you can see on the screen, our mission is to lead, promote, and coordinate clean sport in the Caribbean. So that's WADA, the international independent stakeholder that monitors compliance with the code. The Caribbean RADO, the Regional Secretariat for Anti-Doping in the Caribbean and its 18 member countries, working in conjunction with other organizations, international federations, major event organizers to coordinate clean sport in the Caribbean. On that pictograph, you can also see other agencies. So we all know the IOC, etc. Now, the IOC and National Olympic Committees, the International Paralympic Committee, National Paralympic Committees, and international federations are signatories to the code. They've signed on and they've said, we agree to abide by this document and to implement standards that will ensure level playing fields. We ensure that everyone who participates under the auspices of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, and an international federation will abide by the tenets or the articles of the code. And anyone who does not do that may be sanctioned in the provisions made of the code. And so the roles and responsibilities for signatories like the International Olympic Committee, the International Paralympic Committee, international federations, and then under them, National Olympic Committees, National Paralympic Committees, and National Sport Federations are outlined in the code. They have their own sections stating what their rights and responsibilities are. Also, the national anti-doping organizations and regional anti-doping organizations, well, RADOs are not signatories to the code. We're kind of like the regional independent stakeholder. But national anti-doping organizations might be established with partnerships between the government and the NOC. And so they're supposed to establish an independent organization that can monitor doping in country, that might implement rules, policies, and legislation that will ensure their compliance with the World Anti-Doping Code. Now, I left governments for last because governments are not a signatory to the code. However, if you remember, the involvement of governments is quite important in the fight against doping because governments commit to the articles of the code by the signing of the Copenhagen Declaration on Anti-Doping in Sport. That was done in 2003 on March 3rd. And what that allows is for governments to ratify, accept, approve, and accede to the UNESCO Convention Against Doping in Sport as government entities. So those partnerships between the sporting community, governmental organizations ensure that countries, everyone participating in sport, are bound by the articles of the World Anti-Doping Code and agree to participate in this social world of sport by the rules set forth in that code. And as you so rightly said, we've had about 4 iterations of the World Anti-Doping Code, 4 upgrades, 2003, where we aim to harmonize all the rules internationally, because then everyone kind of had their own rules. International federations might have had one rule, national Olympic committees, etc. And so the code is supposed to be this global document in the broadest sense that provides one location where all athletes or athlete support personnel and sports organizations agree to be bound by these rules. 2009, there was an upgrade to the code. Then 2015 with the Lance Armstrong scandal, things were added in terms of intelligence and investigations, how you seek people who are real cheats, how you deal with them in terms of results management. And 2021 coincided with the Russian anti-doping scandal, but it also deals with things like substances of abuse, which we're going to talk about later on, and how it has allowed for flexibility for some drugs that may not directly enhance performance, but obviously it contravenes what is the spirit of sport, etc. And it set forth how we deal with substances of abuse or threshold substances. So in a nutshell, those are all the organizations that fall under or work in partnership with the World Anti-Doping Agency, and they adhere to the code. Now we have the Court of Arbitration for Sport and labs, very important in this whole doping fight. So the laboratories, again, they're WADA accredited laboratories who test the samples and the athlete biological passports. They would evaluate the athlete profiles and say whether there was an atypical finding, etc., which would lead to investigations. And the Court of Arbitration for Sport until 2020 was the appellate court for results management for a number of international federations. And some of the things pertaining to results management have changed under the 2021 code, and we'll speak about that a little later on. So again, as quickly as I could, that was the outline of this code and how the sporting community agrees to adhere to the code.
Don't worry, folks. If it is you think that Doc is moving a little too fast, catch the replay on our Futsal868 YouTube channel, as well as our Facebook page. Don't worry, it's there. It is in the World Wide Web. It is being recorded. But Doc, it's very interesting you mentioned as regards the focus of WADA when it comes to education, because it is known that sport, mentioned by many, is supposed to be for the inherent good of, but that is not always the case. And sport is not a magical pill, because it is being done, competed by man, if you want to use that word, in terms of male and female. It is being administered, it is organized by same male and female, and thus the modus operandi, the heart of a man, we do not know, and thus we have to be able to protect the inherent good of sport. And I just want to make that quite clear. Also, I want to add to what you were speaking to in terms of WADA, to understand and let our audience understand in terms of WADA governance. There is the foundation board, the executive committee, and the WADA committees, for which some of these committees include the athlete committee, compliance review, education, which we spoke about, ethics, finance, health medical research, gene doping. That was very interesting to me in terms of doing research, the group doing research. There's a gene doping expert group and the TUE expert group, which I know you'll be speaking to a little later. So that was very much interesting, more so in speaking to who is bound by the code, the national level athlete, all the way up to the international organizations are bounded by this code. And as you rightfully said, governments through the UNESCO convention. So Doc, I had a serious conversation in one of my high school chats when it comes to, and I want to be able to have the opportunity to take this piece of the conversation and throw it back in the chat from tomorrow. And one of the guys was saying that in terms of sport, so WADA speaks to all sports, and the WADA code speaks to all sport. But he's saying that he finds that athletics, track and field, they have much more stringent testing than any other sport, right? And that is why there's, when you think about scandals, athletics, track and field is always in the news. Can you speak more to that? Because a lot of persons actually believe without you calling Lance Armstrong and cycling, which was major, by the way, a lot of persons don't recognize that, doping exists in every single sport. Is it true to say, and I know this is a little curveball from what it is we discussed, but is it true to say that track and field athletics has the most amount of testing compared to other sports?
Well, to be honest, I can't say yes or no. What I would say is that if WADA publishes a report on testing every year, and so you get to see which sports are tested, and all sports, all international federations who are bound by the code execute testing programs. The World Anti-Doping Program does not discriminate against any one sport to answer the young athlete. So it may appear as if track and field or athletics seems to be tested more than any other sport, but I guarantee you that all sports are tested. There is the whole concept of proportionality and equity, etc. When you do risk assessments, the national anti-doping organizations, for example, will determine which sports have a higher risk of doping, and so their testing program is going to be informed by that risk assessment. So we don't just say, oh, track and field, let's test them. What organizations do is they create a risk assessment and they grade the sport. So you look at the numbers of persons participating in that sport, male and female, international level, recreational athletes, etc. They look at the history of doping in that sport. They look at other physiological and psychological factors. Does that sport have the potential to be a huge money earner for the persons who are participating? Is that sport popular in the country or on the island? Who participates? What is the profile of that sport in terms of revenue generation? And so the results of that risk assessment will then determine how testing is unfolded in a particular sport. So that's done not just at the national level, but at the international level as well. Of course, athletics is a very high-profile sport. So you will always or almost always see whether there's a scandal, there's a challenge in athletics internationally, because a lot of countries have vested interest in athletics and their athletes participate in. But a sport that's popular in the Caribbean, for example, like cricket tests very often, but you don't necessarily see it in the media for one reason or the other. World skate, they do education when it comes to anti-doping, and they test athletes, and they have athletes who are sometimes guilty of anti-doping rule violations. It may not always be the presence of a substance, but it might be refusing or evading. Cycling is another sport. So I would say all sports are subject to testing, but again, it depends on the risk assessment. And so some sports may have more testing or more rigorous testing programs than others because of a number of factors taken into consideration by the International Federation or the national organization. And just to be clear, not all sporting leagues fall under the World Anti-Doping Code. So, for example, and again, we're probably going to get to this later on when you talk about substances of abuse. Recently, a number of athletes came out and said, we use a particular substance and basically nothing happens. If your league is not, subject to the code, and some private leagues are not, then you can basically do what you want and participate, etc. When we talk about the World Anti-Doping Code, we're talking about athletes who want to compete at the Olympic level, who want to compete in international sport, who want to represent their country and the international scene, participate in world championships. And so those international federations have agreed with the IOC and the IPC that they're going to be bound by the code. So I think that we need to provide a lot of clarity when we talk about who is bound by the code, why they're bound by the code, and how the articles of those codes meet with acceptance or rejection by particular leagues, etc.
Thank you very much for that, Doc. I want to say a real thanks for that, because I know this is going to be coming up soon, especially when it is as soon as the Olympics finishes and the height of Olympics. And we don't want to say it, but there may be a possibility of a scandal, and then moving straight into the football season, and everybody's going to be talking up, so I'm really appreciative of that. So we're talking about the code. Let's dive straight into the code. But before we do that, I just want to recognize a comment from one of our viewers. It probably seems like track and field has more due to total numbers as well as eyeballs on the sport. And Mr. Pat Charles continued by saying, wrestling, cycling, and weightlifting will be as rigorous as athletics. So I want to say thank you very much, Mr. Charles, for chiming in on the conversation, and to all those who are watching us on Facebook, YouTube, and also my personal LinkedIn, feel free to continue to chime in. So, Doc, let's talk this code. Let's have a a little more discussion as regards this WADA code, if we may.
World Anti-Doping Code?
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
the World Anti-Doping Code, yes.
Yes. Yes. And before we get to the code, let me just tell people I am not a medical doctor, so do not ask me about cannabinoids and THC and all the detailed metabolites, etc. And I am not a practicing attorney, so please limit the legal questions. I have persons I could send you to answer those. I am the administrator of the organization, and I will do my best to answer your questions. That's my disclaimer, Geoffrey, and I'm sticking to it.
Accepted, and I agree with you as well. So you want me to move on with the slide?
Yes, we can go ahead. So as we discussed before, well, we basically spoke about this, where we are now with the 2021 code. So we discussed the code. I have a copy of the 2021 code here with me. As an administrator, you always have to work with your code. We're always putting stickies in because you're always trying to clarify something or seeking clarity. And with this document, there are 8 international standards. I think that's on the next slide. So again, there's a new standard, an international standard for education. So next slide, sorry. Yes, a new international standard for education. There is that list that every athlete loves to argue about, or most athletes, not every athlete, but that list that, is always in the public domain, and it always has people asking questions. Why is this on the list, and why not this, and what is this list about? There's an international standard for testing and investigations that tells us how we should test athletes, determining in and out of competition testing, how we go about proving an anti-doping rule violation has occurred. There's an international standard for every laboratory that tests. There is an international standard for therapeutic use exemption. Therapeutic use exemptions, or TUEs, are those documents that give an athlete a right to take a prohibited substance for therapeutic use. So it is that the athlete may have an illness or may suffer an injury, and there's no alternative medication than one that is on the prohibited list. They would apply for what is called the therapeutic use exemption to the tenets of the prohibited list to use that particular substance. It is not indefinite. You get the hall pass or the TUE for a particular length of time, and then you have to reapply should you need to continue using that medication. There's also another new standard, an international standard for the protection of privacy and personal information. There's another new standard, an international standard for code compliance by signatories. And then there's the international standard for results management. So in addition to the code, all anti-doping organizations should know about these international standards by which they should govern and harmonize efforts towards clean sport. In addition to those 8 standards, there are best practice models and guidelines that are not mandatory, but that may be used. Again, if an organization doesn't have the resources, they might be able to look at templates, etc., and adopt those for use in country. So we're at the point where we talk about the list, Geoffrey, right? So the 2021 prohibited list names all substances and methods that are prohibited in competition, out of competition, prohibited at all times, or that may be prohibited in particular sports. So notice that there are substances that might be prohibited carte blanche across the board. Can't use it in or out of competition. And these are non-approved substances, anabolic agents, the usual, the peptide hormones, growth factors, related substances and mimetics, beta-2 agonists, hormone and metabolic modulators, diuretics, and masking agents. Methods that are prohibited at all times would be the manipulation of blood and blood components, chemical and physical manipulation, and you spoke earlier about gene and cell doping. Substances that are prohibited in competition, stimulants, narcotics, cannabinoids, I think everybody knows that word now, and glucocorticoids. And then in particular sports, you have things like beta blockers that might be prohibited, especially in sports like archery, in FIA, automobile racing, billiards, all disciplines, darts, golf, shooting, skiing, skateboarding, or underwater sports, obviously, because you need to have that slow heart rate. You need to be able to breathe properly. And so beta blockers help you to do that. So there's an advantage to be gained by using a beta blocker in particular sports. Now, the key thing about the prohibited list, you don't have to know every single substance, right? That's prohibited. All you need to know is that the list comes out on October 1st in the preceding year. So the 2021 list would have been out in October 2020. That gives the athlete enough time to have their team peruse the list, see what has been added for 2021. And if you are taking that substance, it gives you a period by which you can wean off that medication and use an alternative or apply for therapeutic use exemption if there's a medical reason for you using that substance. So a lot of people argue about the prohibited list, but they don't understand that the medical expert group go through lengths to do, conference with other sporting organizations. They do a lot of recommended, research. They liaise with everyone. There's a period by which you send this document out to get feedback. And then the final list, basically, you put out in October so athletes know, hey, check yourself, get it together, make sure you wean off a substance if it's there, because come January 1st of the next year, this list is going to be in force. And so if everyone had that information.
And that is exactly why, Doc, I took the time to mention the committees, because I don't want persons to think that WADA is the evil one.
Yes.
Because there are committees, working committees, that due to their duties and responsibilities, including the Athletes Commission, that are working in WADA and with WADA to be able to put out this prohibited list. It's not just somebody that's a pie in the sky.
Yes, the consultation is vast. Yeah. And the other thing that we can speak about the list, which has been published since 2004, is that a substance is put on the list if they meet any of 2 of 3 criteria. I think that's another thing people don't understand. So the 3 criteria are this. The substance have the potential to enhance sport performance, or it actually enhances sport performance. So the potential to, or it enhances, that's 1. There's an actual or potential health risk. That's 2. And then 3, again, going back to the philosophy of sport, I think a lot of people don't understand that there is a philosophy behind what we do in the sport world. It violates the spirit of sport, and the spirit of sport, or the essence of sport, found in Olympism, like through values such as respect, fair play, excellence, respect for your competitor, etc. All of those are outlined in the Olympic Charter and in the code, in the precursor of the code. And so if any substance or method can meet 2 of 3 of these criteria, they're put on the prohibited list. So they're not arbitrary. We don't just pick and choose which substance goes on. And as you said, the consultation happens through the WADA list expert group and the Health, Medical and Research Committee. There's a monitoring program that looks at other substances that might have the performance to enhance, the potential, to enhance performance. And so there's an evaluation that's going on with new substances that are likely to be put on the list. So it's not arbitrary, it's not random. A lot of work goes into publishing this list every year.
It's interesting that when you look at the WADA code as well, Doc, in the prohibited list, there's a line that states at the end of it, and other substances with a similar chemical structure or similar biological effect or effects.
Yes.
So persons, please be aware of that line from a medical and legal standpoint, because it has really and truly come up many times when lawyers have to get involved. I understand, and WADA always have to highlight that, that line that states, and I will repeat it again, it states, and other substances with a similar chemical structure or similar biological effect or effects, because a lot of times persons say, but it's not on the list. Yeah? Am I talking the truth there, Doc?
Yeah. And another thing for athletes especially, and parents and athlete support personnel, again, you do not have to know the list. I'm sorry I didn't send this to you, but there are a number of safe sites that athletes and athlete support personnel can go to see if a substance is prohibited or not. One of the sites is called Global DRO. So the word global with DRO at the end of it.com. And you can go on to Global DRO. You can type in, it will ask you to type your region, etc. If you're an athlete, what sport you play, and you can type in the active ingredient in any medication, and it will tell you if that medication or that substance is banned in competition, out of competition, or both. So there are places you can go to find this information. You don't have to memorize the list every year. You don't always have to pay the money to go to a doctor to find out. But you can go to these free sites that can tell you if a substance is banned or not. And I want to take the opportunity here to just shout out every member of the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Board, from Virgin Islands in the north to Guyana and Suriname on the south. Our member country representatives work tirelessly to ensure this information is out there. And a special welcome mention to our chairman, Patrick Rillerman out of Aruba, and Dr. Adrian Lord, who's right here in Barbados. And the reason why I'm singling them out, Geoffrey, is because as much as Dr. Lord is a medical doctor, his phone rings a lot with athletes and parents saying, Doc, is this banned? Can I use this? And he offers the information. So you just need to find a doctor who knows about sports medicine, and you can get that information from them. When you go to the doctor and you are injured athletes, please let your doctor know if you are participating in five-a-side football, if you are a member of the football team, the national football team. Let them know if you're in volleyball training. Let them know if you're an international level athlete. Because some doctors who might be a general practitioner or nutritionist might actually prescribe something that contains a banned substance. And the code talks about strict liability in that an athlete is responsible for everything they ingest. And saying that you don't know about it is not enough to absolve you from the rules and regulations contained within the code. So please say something. Yeah, when you go to the doctor, let them know that you're an athlete and ask them to ensure that the medication they're prescribing is not on the list.
So just to recap, that says globaldro.com. It is on the screen. That's globaldro.com. Thank you very much for that, Doc. I just want to continue and let's continue to add nuggets to what you're stating, noting that the therapeutic use of the prohibited substance, as is in the code TUE, or prohibited methods, highly unlikely to produce any additional enhancement of performance beyond what might be anticipated by a return to the athlete's normal state of health following the treatment of the acute or chronic medical condition. And I'm going to continue with my own words for what they are taking it for. Yes?
Yes.
So just want to make sure that we clarify that. And once again, that is globaldro.com. To all the stakeholders in sport, please visit the site so that you can be able to protect you and yours, coaches, parents, guardians, principals, teachers. Please, we ask you all to educate yourself as we go along.
Geoffrey, I just want to add one other thing quickly. This whole idea about supplements, Dr. Lord would have my head if I did not mention supplements. Parents, please, cook for your children. Cook for them. Give them some dasheen and some eddos. Give them some dal and rice. For those of y'all in Trinidad, I'm missing, my home food. For those of you in Barbados, some cuckoo and flying fish. The idea is that, the nutritional value of eating a home-cooked meal should be enough to provide supplementation for an athlete. However, if you feel like you need to use a supplement, please ensure that that supplement is checked out. And another site, Informed Sport. The word informed sport is another safe site. What you can do is you can go on with any supplement that you want to take. You can put in the batch number, the batch code, at Inform Sport, and it will tell you if that batch was tested and whether or not there were any performance enhancing substances in that batch of supplements. So please be careful with the supplements. Not all supplements list the ingredients on the label. They list some of the things that's there, but they don't list everything that's in it.
That is very interesting, because I mean, I just take my supplements. I just buy the gummy bears for son as well. So I'll go and check that out now, Doc. But it's also interesting what you speak about in terms of food, because Trinidad and Tobagonians, they love to be able to buy out. And now the fact that we were able to buy out, we have loads of persons who are lining up to get their favorite fast food or takeaway foods.
Yes.
Athletes, please be aware of that, and please help us to be able to not necessarily only buy local, but feed yourself properly.
Yes.
With that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to discuss more as regards anti-doping with Dr. Sasha Sutherland from the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization. We'll be right back. So as you just saw, it is Kids Connect. It comes off on the 2nd to the 6th of August. Mental health. We have to protect our minds as much as we protect our bodies. It is free for children ages 7 to 17. And then we have adults, both 18 to 21, as well as a session for parents, guardians, as well as coaches. It is facilitated by mental health practitioners, experienced mental health practitioners, including psychologists, as well as advocates who will be able to introduce the idea of mental health to your children. It is free, and it is online, 1 hour to 1.5 hours per session, one session per day. And we ask you all to register. So check us out on our social media pages, our Facebook and Instagram, as regards to how do you register to be a part of Kids Connect, our free mental health webinars for children. Doc, I want to say we thank you very much. And on this slide, in continuation to what it is you had mentioned before, the therapeutic use exemption process. If it is, you could want to put us quickly as we move on in the conversation.
Definitely. And I must say, Dr. Lord is looking. Dr. Lord, feel free to chime in and comment. If it wasn't for Dr. Lord, I'd be in the background in the engine room every single time and just pushing him forward to get the information out there. So therapeutic use exemption. So I'm an athlete, I get injured, or I'm an athlete with a chronic disease, or I'm an athlete needing... Yeah, let's start with chronic disease or injured, right? And here I have inline speed skating. I go to my doctor, I go to Dr. Lord, and I say, Dr. Lord, this is what's happening, etc. Dr. Lord, as my doctor, both sport medicine and general practitioner, is going to have my history, etc. He's going to want to prescribe a medication for me. He's going to look at the prohibited list, the 2021 prohibited list, and he's going to say, well, this is a stimulant, you can't use it, or this is a narcotic, we may not be able to use it. However, if I need to use that medication and it is prohibited, right? Dr. Lord is going to have to apply to the Therapeutic Use Exemption Committee of my national anti-doping organization, or the NOC if we don't have a RADO, the National Anti-Doping Organization. If I'm an international level athlete, that TUE may have to go to the International Federation. So again, it's determined by the athlete's participation in sport. So I'll pause there and go back to the easy one. If Dr. Lord prescribes me with a medication that is not on the list, I can go ahead and use that medication, which is why it's key to tell your doctor, I'm a national athlete, or I'm in national training, so I may be subject to testing, or I'm going overseas in a tournament where there might be testing. So if I take a medication and any markers of that remains in my system, I might return a positive test or an adverse analytical finding. So if the medication is not on the list, great. You go ahead and you take that Histale or whatever it is. If the medication is on the prohibited list, you have to apply for a TUE at least 30 days in advance of the competition. So don't wait until day 25 to say, oh, shucks, I'm taking this medication and I need a TUE. You want to give yourself enough time, especially if you have a chronic illness, right? You know that you're taking insulin or whatever for a particular medical condition. You don't want to wait until 30 days and then apply. You want to give the committee enough time to be convened and reviewed. They're not just sitting there waiting. So you want them to be able to return a decision on whether or not you approved or denied to take that medication. So on that therapeutic use exemption form, which you can find on our website, caribbeanrado.com, you will fill out your demographic information. Your doctor will fill out the medical information, the history of your medical illness, etc. And they will sign and stamp. Please sign and stamp so the process is not delayed, and they will submit it to the Therapeutic Use Exemption Committee for review. Once it's sent to the Anti-Doping Organization TUE Committee for review, they will look and see, well, the athlete has had a history of this illness from the time they were 2 years old. There is no advantage to be gained by using this advantage because, as you said earlier, Geoffrey, taking that medication does not give you an advantage. So it's not like all athletes are on this playing field. You are here, and when you take that medication, you're going to be here. Quite the contrary, as a result of your illness or your injury, you're actually starting at a disadvantage. So you're underneath the starting point. And so by taking that medication, it actually returns you to a level playing field to engage the sport. And so there's no advantage to be gained by using a prohibited substance for therapeutic use. The committee will review. They will go do a back and forth if they need more information, if they need anything clarified. And I believe there are over 28 guidelines. That's why we tell athletes, give the TUE committee time. They have to go through whether it's the DSM, whatever guideline that's on WADA's list for whether it's asthma, whether it is a chronic disease, whether it's for diabetes, etc. They have to go through their own checklist to determine whether or not they can approve or deny that therapeutic use exemption. If they deny it, you can't use it. You have to go back to your doctor and find an alternative medication. If they deny the use, they will send you a report indicating why they've denied the use of that medication. If, however, the committee has approved the medication, the athlete can go ahead and take it. But on the decision, the reasoned decision, the TUE committee, the Therapeutic Use Exemption Committee, will say the period through which the athlete can take that medication.
Extensive, but definitely very much important.
Yes.
As we move on to detecting and sanctioning doping, what are your takes, Doc?
Well, quickly, because one of the points that came up with doping was substances of abuse, right? And perhaps maybe we should go for athletes. Can I just digress a bit, Geoffrey?
Yeah.
Because this would be a precursor, yes, for sanctioning. The whereabouts information that we spoke about earlier. Now, again, ADAMS, the Anti-Doping Administration and Management System. This is for registered testing pool athletes. So if you've never heard that word before, chances are you don't have to submit your whereabouts information. right? Every athlete who's part of what is called a registered testing pool will get a letter saying, "Dear Jeffrey Edwards, because of your outstanding performance in futsal, we would like you to know that you are now part of our registered testing pool. This means we require you to submit your whereabouts information in the Anti-Doping Administrative and Management System, aka ADAMS. We'd like to know where you are for training, where you live, your competitions, etc. And you have to provide that information for every quarter of the year. So you don't have to go on and do it every day. So in January, you'd provide for January, February, March. In March, you should provide for April, May, June, etc., etc.
And again, doctors, just making sure that persons understand this is not only track and field athletes who get this letter. So even Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, LeBron, these guys are getting this letter.
Right. This is everybody across all sports once they're signatories to the code.
Thank you very much.
So you would receive it, you put in your information, and it's so easy. There's Athlete Central, there's an app for your phone, so you don't have to go and find a laptop. You don't have to find a monitor. You can use it. Everybody has a phone. Every athlete now uses a phone, whether it's an Android or an iPhone. Y'all can leave that arguments to yourselves, but the bottom line is both of them work with the Anti-Doping Administration and Management System. And if you are going to a competition, for example, and it has been cancelled at the last minute, and so you're not boarding that flight, you can go into Adams and change to say, I'm not leaving Trinidad and Tobago on the 25th of July anymore to go to the Olympics because I fractured my toe. I'm going to be here during the period of the Olympics. If an anti-doping organization or an international federation wants to test you, they're going to go in here, providing they're your custodian organization. So not everybody has access to your information. Let me allay those fears. Only the anti-doping organization who has custodianship of your sport or the organization for who you're in the RTP, the registered testing pool, has access to your information, or any delegated third party, and they are bound by that international standard for the protection and privacy of information. So it's not marketing. So we're not taking your information and selling it to the highest bidder. Okay, it is safe and secure. So you go in. I'm looking for Jeffrey Edwards, and I realized, well, hold on, Jeffrey was supposed to leave on the 25th, and we were supposed to test him in Tokyo, but his whereabouts now say it's changed. Then they can abort the test, so there's no risk of them turning up at your room in Tokyo. You're not there, and there's a missed test because your whereabouts is not there. I will say, for athletes who are not part of a registered testing pool, you can also, a national federation might just have a general testing pool. And so you may be required to put information in Adams, but you won't have to put that 1 hour period where you're going to be every time. So, a lot of the scandals are like, oh, they came to test me and, I wasn't there and they didn't knock on the door, etc. If you're a part of an RTP, you have to put a 1 hour slot where doping control officers can turn up, and you will be there for them to test you. More often than not, athletes put the time period where they know they're probably going to be home sleeping. So whether it's early in the morning or late in the evening, they put that 1 hour, or they might put it where they're training or where they work, etc. But please know we will find you if we need to. So it is best to comply, just again, in spirit of cooperation and in the spirit of sport, to ensure that we protect, again, the integrity of sport and your safety as an athlete participating in sport. So I wanted to speak about the RTP and the whereabouts information, Jeffrey, before we move into the sanctioning, because the next slide introduces sanctioning for athletes who don't submit their whereabouts information. So earlier I would have said there are missed tests and whereabouts, right? And so a combination of both might lead to an anti-doping rule violation. So if you are part of a registered testing pool and you don't enter your information, your international federation is just not going to slap you with a ban. They're going to write to you and say, please update your information. We're trying to find you. You're going to get letters. And if you have 3 missed tests, or you fail to submit your whereabouts information, a combination of a combination of 3 in 12 months, you will be charged with an anti-doping rule violation, right? So any combination of missed tests or filing failures as defined by the international standard for testing and investigations within a 12-month period will render an athlete in a registered testing pool guilty of failing to provide the information, and you may be sanctioned for an anti-doping rule violation. What happens is once that charge is issued, the athlete actually has a period in time where you can respond to the review and say, no, I was there, the doorbell was broken, if you had just knocked on the door a little harder, or whatever it is. Or no, I did go to the neighbor to get ice, etc. I have video camera footage that can prove I was there. So I think the key to all of this, Jeffrey, is that it's not rules so that the athlete has to remember all of this. You are at the center of what we do. And so there's a lot of flexibility in the 2021 code because we're giving the athlete the opportunity to say, I was there, or I am adhering to the rules, etc. It is about your fundamental right to participate in clean sport. We are interested in catching the real cheats, right? So don't get caught for an anti-doping rule violation that has to do with a filing failure or missed test. Please, it's important. Just do it.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because Miss Marsha Boyce from Barbados would have mentioned this all shows how important athlete support personnel will be in guiding athletes or advising athletes. And I totally agree with you. It's interesting because to me, it makes me ask you a question. Is this probably one of the reasons why you say not going back to run with all of the attention on him, having to fill out all this form? I mean, I know he has personnel to assist him, and he always speak about the fact that, oh Lord, I don't want to train. I don't want to train no more because, it is so much difficult. But this is really good stuff. And thank you very much, Marsha, for your input.
Yes.
And we ask others to continue to make the inputs accordingly. So moving on, Doc.
Yes. What's next? Okay, so major changes to the code. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Go to I think TTOC, Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee, uses Dave, and there's Tyrone, and there's Stefan, and another of fantastic attorneys at law throughout the region who help athletes with anti-doping rule violations, with navigating the code, who help anti-doping organizations. We provided training for a number of attorneys who now work in sports law, who now work in anti-doping with regards to the code. So I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just going to point out some of the major things. So again, one of the major changes to the code in 2021 has to do with adding flexibility on sanctioning. And so when we talk about substances of abuse, a few weeks ago, the entire athletics world was in an uproar. We're not calling names, Geoffrey. I see you touching your head, about the herb. Let's use the herb, the marijuana.
We know that's a plant-like substance.
The plant-like substance. I like that one. I like that. The plant-like substance. So everybody was up in arms about it. But if you read the regulations, if you read the code, you understand there is flexibility in sanctioning. And to be fair, that was really, we're going to leave the ellipsis there, ... right? So when it comes to anti-doping rule violations involving substances of abuse, it's 3 months or lower. So it's 3 months, you start there. And if the athlete agrees to go through a rehabilitation program, then you can reduce that sanction to 1 month. Now, if you ingest in competition or you have use or possession, 3 anti-doping rule violations listed there, but it's not related to sport for performance. So the athlete, the burden of proof on the athlete, they can prove that it was not related to sport performance, or they didn't aim to get an advantage using that substance. It wasn't intentional, for example. You can, there's flexibility in sanctioning. You still are going to get sanctioned because at the end of the day, the substance is prohibited, right? For evading or refusing sample collection, If you can prove exceptional circumstances under the 2021 code, that sanction is now 2 to 4 years. If you're a protected person or recreational athlete, then that 2 years might go all the way downward to a reprimand. And I just want to read from the code. When we talk about protected persons and recreational athletes, who we are talking about, it's not everybody and their granny, okay? It is an athlete or natural person who at the time of the anti-doping rule violation, 1, has not reached the age of 16 years, 2, has not reached the age of 18 years and is not included in a registered testing pool, and has never competed in an international event in an open category, or 3, for reasons other than age, that person has been determined to lack the legal capacity under applicable national legislation. So it is very clear about who that protected person or the recreational athlete might be. So if you're scrimmaging and you're playing football was my number one sport, people. So forgive me for using the football references all the time. I also played tennis, but football is known throughout the region. So if you're scrimmaging, right, you might be considered a recreational athlete. A recreational athlete, according to the definition in the code, is a natural person who is so defined by the National Anti-Doping Organization, provided, however, the term shall not include persons who, within the 5 years prior to committing any anti-doping rule violation, has been an international level athlete as defined by an international federation consistent with the international standard for testing and investigations, or national athlete as defined by the national organization consistent with the ISTI, is what we call the international standard for testing and investigation. So you can't be some big time football star within the last 5 years, come and take the drug and then say I'm a recreational athlete because I just scrimmaging. You're supposed to know the rules, right? So the rules, they clearly define who's protected, who's recreational, etc. in terms of that flexibility. So Joe Bloke, who works at Dermacell Inc., and wants to lose a little bit of weight because he just sits behind the desk, has never competed in a national tournament outside of his primary school sports day, is not going to be considered an athlete underneath the code, right? And then no significant fault. Protected persons or recreational athletes go from reprimand to 2 years for presence, use, and possession. We can go to the other slide. Oh, no. So I think if you go back, sorry, yes. So if an individual is guilty of an anti-doping rule violation, but they provide substantial assistance, they can actually get their ban reduced. Their period of ineligibility is the official term for being banned in sport, right? When you talk about substances of abuse, especially, the whole idea is that the money that you spend doing results management for something like a substance of abuse, or for an athlete providing assistance, you can actually spend going behind the real cheats, the people who intentionally dope to gain an advantage or to enhance their performance, right? So, the case resolution in this area is at the discretion of the anti-doping organization under the direction of RADO. And then tampering in connection with the doping control process for an underlying asserted anti-doping rule violation might be considered a standalone first violation. So you're not just going to get like a 4-year sanction. So, and as I said, I'm just showing what the major changes are because I don't want to get into the legalese of it, because I'm not a practicing attorney for results management. And so the final slide that talks about major changes, especially when it comes to sanctioning under the code. If you are guilty of an anti-doping rule violation, but there are circumstances where you didn't cooperate, etc., or you knowingly committed an anti-doping rule violation, intentional, we're talking about the intention here, you might get an additional 2 years on top of your sanction. You no longer get credit for timely admission or prompt or timely admission to the anti-doping rule violation as compared to substances of abuse where you acknowledge, yes, I took it. That's prompt admission. I knowingly did it, but it wasn't to enhance performance. And then the breach of provisional suspension, no credit for any period served, and you get your results disqualified if you breach a provisional suspension and you go on and try to run off to some competition, because there's reward to be had. So those are major changes when it comes to sanctioning. And then the next slide, finally. The implementation of decisions. So remember, we talked about harmonizing the code. We're also now harmonizing the results management process. So it is not that you're going to be banned by Futsal, TT, and then the International Federation, FIFA is going to say, no, you could go ahead and play, right? The decisions by signatories, national appellate bodies, or CAS have binding effects to every signatory in sport with particular provisions. So those are what we want to share with the general public, that, the rules are binding. There is flexibility when we deal with specific substances, but if you cheat intentionally, there are going to be aggravating circumstances, in a nutshell.
So basically speaking, ladies and gents, it is important to understand that in terms of the presence of prohibited substance, you have a personal duty, there's strict liability, and sufficient evidence need to be shown. Additionally, when it comes to that, you have to look at the list, effective sanction regime, and clear communication of this in speaking to all stakeholders in the sporting landscape. Is that quite correct, Doc? In simply saying?
Quite correct. In simple terms, yes.
In simple terms, right. Moving on to COVID-19 and clean sport. How has COVID-19 affected the doping regulations, the doping regime, noting that I can't possibly come to you? How does that affected us?
Well, when COVID-19 happened, obviously, there was a lot of uncertainty regarding testing, etc. But I really appreciate the fact that we have an international agency, the World Anti-Doping Agency, that's quick to respond to what's happening. And so they were quick to respond to the pandemic. I also want to say thank you to our over 117 doping control officers that we have throughout the region who are tirelessly working and who are committed to clean sport in the Caribbean. Sometimes you call a doping control officer today for tomorrow, and they say, well, providing they're not working because it's voluntary. Yes, I will do this mission. Yes, I will do this. What are the guidelines, etc. And so we've had doping control officers in the middle of COVID who were committed to the task. And so in terms of affecting doping control or clean sport in the region, basically COVID-19 catalyzed a lot of amendments and improvements to the sample collection process for us under the direction of the RADO, the International Sport Federations, or the International Testing Agencies, for who we were doing sample collection. The amendments and the improvements helped us to maintain the integrity of the sample collection process by ensuring that all our procedures and amendments were in compliance with the international standard for testing and investigation. So what we did when RADO published their guidance document for resuming testing in 2020, we amended it to include the Caribbean sportscape and the Caribbean landscape in conjunction with what the World Health Organization was doing, what the Pan American Health Organization was doing, and what the health authorities in each country in the region we're doing. And so again, I'm going to call Dr. Lord's name a lot of times. His ear is probably ringing, but those guidelines and that documentation was obviously, he played an integral part of us making sure we adapted to the local regulations in each country. And so the Caribbean RADO had to produce a guiding document for resuming testing, which contains steps that adhere to in the resumption of doping control, measures added to the sample collection process, and supporting documentation regarding the use of personal protective equipment, how we would unroll our testing program, how we collect samples, etc. So the first thing we had to do was make a decision of when we would resume testing, if we were going to. And again, those were based on factors like what was happening in the country at the time. Was sport shut down? Was it just single sports or contact sports, etc.? What were the regulations by the ministries of health in that country what the international federations were saying. So a lot of consultation was ongoing. And then we had to phase in the testing. So we did a lot of out of competition testing and small testing missions. We stopped a urine sample collection and we looked at the higher risk athletes. Remember, I spoke about that risk assessment that each country should have. Well, we also do risk assessment at the RADO, incorporating the risk assessments that we receive from our member countries. And so the higher risk athletes, the ones who we were looking at, so athletes who were likely to participate in an international competition or who will use this as an opportune time to get some cheating underway. Not that we thought any Caribbean athlete would do this, but just again to maintain a level playing field, we looked at RTP athletes or registered testing pool athletes. We looked at athletes who were part of the athlete passport management unit in Adams. So there are some athletes who international federations were looking at more closely than others. And then we looked at the testing locations. Was it easily accessible? Did you have to come into contact with a lot of people? Once we decided how we were going to phase in testing, then we had to engage the WADA accredited laboratories. So we used 2 labs for the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization, but depending on the International Federation for who we might collect a sample, they would use other labs. And so there was ongoing communication to determine which lab was working with skeleton staff, if they were receiving samples but not testing, the length of time it will take them to return the results, if they were accepting samples, etc. And then we looked at possibly how we could expand the program. And then additional measures just had to deal with the on-the-day testing, that whole personal protection equipment. So gloves, face masks, cleansing and sanitizing agents. And you would appreciate that in the heights of COVID, those things were not easy to find. So, we had to do a lot of wheeling and dealing and really negotiating to get those things to our sample collection personnel in the 18 member countries for which we have representation. So for the sample collection personnel, we also had to consider whether or not they were at risk as well. So who was available for the mission, the number of sample collection personnel, if they would have the option to test in the phased-in approach, did they have transportation or would they have to be using public transportation? In that case, we wouldn't want you testing, so it would determine whether or not we had to abort a mission. Then did they have COVID-19 specific training? And we had to eliminate among our doping control officers risk groups. So were you in risk group 1? Were you a healthcare professional? Were you in a risk group where you were in a mission where an athlete subsequently tested positive for COVID-19? Were you living with a person who was in risk group 1 or 2? Were you living among the vulnerable population, persons over 60 with underlying conditions, with compromised immune systems, etc.? And then how would we do the data protection and self-certification for testing sample collection personnel? And then finally, what we did was an information and communication strategy. We held Zoom training for our doping control officers, went through those guidelines with them, and then we made communication with our member country representatives across the 18 member countries, who was then responsible for reaching out to the National Olympic Committees, the National Anti-Doping Organizations, the National Sport Federations, etc., while we dealt with the international community. And so it was basically to say we were looking at resuming testing in the region under reduced numbers of sample collection personnel. We've introduced measures for safety, their data requirements, to RTP athletes, to the national federations, National Olympic Committees, Paralympic committees. We asked them to share information. Where your athletes, are they overseas, are they in country, etc., so we can get access to them. And then we gave each mission leader a COVID-19 athlete information letter saying, we want to outline the health directives specifically in that country. We want to say that it conforms to doping control selection. There's a requirement to comply in the midst of the pandemic because you're still under the rule or the guidelines of the World Anti-Doping Code. So yes, there's a pandemic going on, but sports training, etc., was still happening, whether that was at your home or in remote locations, etc. But then we did try to allay their fears by saying we have implemented measures to protect the health of the athlete, and we outlined the potential consequences if an athlete did not want to comply. So for failure for complying means that you might be guilty of an anti-doping rule violation, because again, there's still an obligation to ensure nobody's cheating in this downtime. So we told them additional personal information was required. The storage and sharing would be under the ISPPPI, the international standard for the protection of personal information. And we asked them to complete a COVID-19 athlete questionnaire for the continuation of the process. Were you in contact with someone? Do you have any symptoms, etc.? Providing they answered no, then sample collection could go ahead. If they answered yes, a supplementary report form would be completed by the doping control officer, and then we would move on to the results management process to determine whether there was an adverse an anti-doping rule violation, or whether it was just cause for the test had to be abandoned for X cause, and we could prove it because that person had a test. So, there was a lot to do in terms of preparing for the mission, arriving at the athlete location, the pre-notification information, using your own pen, asking the athlete to use their own pen, making sure you social distance, staying at the door if necessary, using a bathroom that's within close proximity, but big enough that, there can be distance while still adhering to the international standard for testing. And then how you complete the sample collection session by discarding of the gloves, the mask, everything that you would have used in a garbage bag, tying it out, taking it with you, and then disposing of it. So, COVID-19 really stretched us as an organization with limited resources, but we had to rise to the occasion and meet the challenge where possible. And we did do in-competition testing in the midst of the pandemic, and it was very successful. And again, we couldn't do what we do without our doping control officers, our results management and TUE volunteers, and our member country representatives who support the work that we do in anti-doping.
It clearly shows the famous Olympic statement, the show must go on. Not in the context used back then, but definitely in the context to be able to ensure that all anti-doping measures continued during this difficult time that is the COVID-19 pandemic. So hats off to the entire Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization for serving the people of the West Indies. And we want to say appreciate that to one and all who will be looking on. Thank you very much, Doc. Any closing remarks from you?
Closing remarks. So many, but I'm so mindful that we're over the time.
No, we over the time, but I mean, this is football. We are
we're in overtime, coming down to penalties.
This is our 130 minutes. This is the 90-minute mark. We in extra time now.
We in extra time.
We could talk the things, man. We could talk.
Okay, if you would permit me, I know we didn't speak about marijuana and everything, and that's okay. We can do that in part 2. Right?
Yes, I mean, we're talking about but Doc, if you will oblige, run us through. I know that you had on a local cable, a regional cable sports network would have interviewed you as regards to that matter, and you put it quite succinctly. Can you just summarize that scenario and situation with the US sprinter, who is interesting because an American-based sportscaster literally showed where her social media numbers tripled, somewhat quadrupled, kind of millions for each of the social media accounts that she had.
Yeah.
Given this scenario as regards to her use of the plant-like substance.
Yes.
Talk us through that, Doc.
Let's talk about the plant-like substance. So, one of the things we do as anti-doping organizations is we try not to judge athletes, again, because we believe that the athletes are the center of what we do, and we want to move them from that ineligibility to eligibility, right? So what I will do is summarize what is out there, what we know as fact. The athletes won a race at the trials, but the sample returned an adverse analytical finding for the plant-like substance. Therefore, the athlete had a period of ineligibility or suspension of 1 month starting on June 28th. The positive test erased the athlete's performance in the particular event. where the National Athletics Association dictates the top 3 finishers in that given event qualify for the Olympics, right? Provided the performances reach the Olympic standard. Now, we know that the plant-like substance, marijuana, is banned in competition. In competition being the period of 11:59 p.m. of the day before competition, in which an athlete is scheduled to participate through the end of the competition and the sample collection process related to such competition. And the reason why the sample collection process related to such competition is included, Geoffrey, is because you can go to an event, you can go to a football match, for example, and at the end of the 90 minutes, overtime, penalties, you select an athlete by, and you take them to the doping control station. The game has ended. This is the final. The competition is over. That athlete is still doing an in-competition test because the sample collection process has not been completed. So it's important that athletes don't think, well, final whistle blown, competition done. No, you're selected for an in-competition test. You have to see the process through. Now, in terms of the substance of abuse in question, an athlete might have up to 150 nanograms per milliliter of THC, the main psychoactive substance in marijuana, without the cause for a positive test. If you go over that threshold, you return an adverse analytical finding. Those are the guidelines, right? Why is marijuana on the prohibited list? This is what I would have gone over there. It is a substance of abuse. There are thresholds that are allowed. And if you go over that threshold, then it might show up in competition. It falls under the substances of abuse, which are not prohibited out of competition, but that might show up in competition, right? And those substances of abuse are ones that we use recreationally, and I'm using that word loosely, we use recreationally in society, but are banned in sport because it contravenes the spirit of sport. Remember, when we go back to why a substance might make the prohibited list, it has to meet 2 of the 3 criteria: potential to enhance, contravenes the spirit of law, and an athlete's health and well-being, right? And unless you have a TUE for a particular substance, the argument that, it's being used medically is void unless you have a TUE for use in sport. And I think what athletes need to understand, or what we try to help athletes understand, is sport is a social world that creates its own rules. And we are bound by the rules of sport, that World Anti-Doping Code. It's not WADA's code, it's not AAA's code, it's not FIFA's code. All the organizations signed on to this document. We all said we would adhere to the rules. Do the rules need changing sometimes? The experts in consultation with all these organizations determine that sometimes, yes, we need to change. And I want to say that the code is a living document, right? We've had 4 iterations, which shows that ever so often things get added, things get taken out. We talk about increased flexibility in the 2021 code. And so we need to understand that the code is a living document, and it can change. But for now, these are the rules and regulations by which we're bound. So marijuana is an S9, a cannabinoid. Remember, in the prohibited list, we look at the different types of substances. So marijuana falls under category S9, which are cannabinoids, and not marijuana itself, but tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the THC, the psychoactive chemical that is present in natural cannabis products. So, we went through the sanctioning that, Article 10.2.4 would dictate that for THC, 3 months ineligibility and no need to further assess the degree of fault on the athlete's behalf is the sanction. However, if the athlete goes under rehabilitation, the sanction may be further reduced to 1 month. Going back to the athlete in question, remember, under the sanctions, we talk about prompt admittance, etc. So there are a number of variables that you take into consideration in the results management process. And so sometimes people say, but how come this person get this and not this person? You have to look at, is it a first-time violation? What are the rules? What are the mitigating circumstances? Was there prompt admission? Was there cooperation on behalf of the athlete? And a number of things, a number of factors go into determining how the review is done, or what the review unveils, and how sanctioning for that athlete or any athlete for that reason might be reasoned. So I would reiterate, like I did earlier, that there's a huge conciliation and compromise when it comes to athletes and anti-doping agencies, because the money and the resources that we spend trying to determine whether or not an athlete who took marijuana or heroin or cocaine out of competition, not intending to enhance their performance, can be spent catching a real cheat who really takes for deliberate performance equates, right? So we want to make sure that you're not wasting time, efforts, and energy if there's prompt admission, etc. And I'm not trying by any means on a personal level to discount the use of heroin, cocaine, etc. That's a whole other conversation for another time. I'm just saying, in terms of the rules and the strict application of the rule, a substance of abuse used out of competition is a personal choice. But if that substance shows up in competition, it will be dealt with by the code. And so that's a summary of that case, the applicable rules, and the fact that in terms of a substance of abuse and other prohibited substances that are used to gain advantage, the difference is in the sanctioning for the presence of substances of abuse in competition.
People, I hope all you understand, the goodly doctor take a time so Caribbean people don't continue the bacchanal, right? Jamaica still and Trinidad and Tobago still going to put the US third when it comes to the 4x100 meters relay. Caribbean power, Caribbean strong, we going all the way. Just to be able to do an overview of results management, we go from whereabouts to testing, initial review, whether it be TUE or obvious departures, provisional suspension, obviously a question mark, or provisional hearing, initial review, notification, assertion, provisional suspension or provisional hearing, initial hearing, and appeal through the Court of Arbitration for Sport. Yes, Doc? I have it correct?
You have it correct. You do your homework.
Nice to bad. That's what we're talking about. So, your closing remarks, Doc, noting that we have been getting some really... Doc, before you go, let me the people saying it, Miss Melissa Valdez, talk the thing, doctor. Right? Mr. Charles saying, thanks, Geoffrey, for this educational platform. Thanks, Dr. Sutherland, for your clarity in this topic. Adrian says, thank you, Doc. Karen Boyce, thank you, Dr. Sutherland, for the information. Education is the key and so very important. And again, back to Ms. Valdez, who said this was very informative. So the people have spoken. Now, Doc, talk to us.
Closing remarks. First and foremost, I've enjoyed being here. Education is key. Yes. That's what we want to do. So any opportunity to clarify, whether it's myself or another member of the RADO or your member country representative, hold us accountable as well. We have an obligation to provide the education to the public, to the athletes, to the national sport federations. If we're not doing our job, call us out on it. Make us do the job. In terms of general advice, I would like to say to everybody, remember, sport is a social world, people. It's created with its own norms and values. The things that we could do in MMA, we can't do on the road, in Port of Spain or in Bridgetown. You can't go and beat up somebody because it's not a sport and you'll get locked up. But in MMA, you can. Sport is a social world with its own rules. Education is key. Please know what's on the prohibited list and why before we engage in some of these discussions online. At least know the substances that you want to take. You don't have to know the whole list. But if you know you want to take a particular substance or supplement, check it out. Remember, if you take a substance, it is at you, strict liability. If you still want to take that substance and you know it's for medical use, then make sure you apply for therapeutic use exemption. And again, remember, rehabilitation is not perfect and it's left to the discretion of the anti-doping organization to determine, right? And for rehabilitation to be accepted, we want to be in terms of substances of abuse, we want to be sure it was taken out of competition, it was not used to enhance performance, and that rehabilitation of the athlete would occur, not just for substances of abuse, but for any substance that's on the list. We want to rehabilitate athletes so that they get restored to that period where they can compete, and we can put that history behind them and not just label them as a cheat forever, especially in cases of inadvertent doping. Note that the code is a living document, so to speak. It's consistently evolving. We want to harmonize the rules and regulations so that playing is level across countries and sports. People, as a Caribbean, we are hitting above our weight. We don't have the resources like the US or the UK or Germany or the Netherlands or some of these other countries. Support our athletes, win, lose, or draw. I mean, we have a song in Trinidad that talks about that, right?
Correct.
We support our athletes come hell or high water in good times and bad times. We can't just be bandwagonists. Support them when they succeed, support them when they fail. The athletes are at the center of everything that we do. And so my final word would be anti-doping or clean sport matters, because sport matters. When any one of those athletes win a medal in Tokyo, that athlete is not from Jamaica, that athlete is not from Trinidad and Tobago, that athlete is not from the Barbados or from Barbados. All of us are going to say that's a Caribbean athlete. All of us are going to be jumping up with the Vincentians if somebody wins, with the Grenadians if somebody wins, with Trinidad and Tobago if somebody wins. We are one region, we are stronger together. So enjoy Tokyo 2020. Call us anytime. We're here to support. Jeffrey, thank you for having me.
And as you say, call us anytime. Please, guys, feel free to check out the website. It is CaribbeanRADO.com. It is very much comprehensive. There's a lot of resources. As you can see, the whole anti-doping code and guidelines, Caribbean RADO documents. It speaks about the TUE collaborations, the anti-doping community, news and media, and also, most importantly, who we are and who they serve. So for athletes, information for coaches, information for medical professionals. Please, guys, education, education, education. Doc, it has been an utmost pleasure. We want to say thank you very much. On behalf of the Futsal Association of Trinidad Tobago, my family to yours, especially what we have spoken offline. Thank God for all his mercies that he has done. And we really and truly wish that he continue to provide you and your family with continued support and blessings like the rest of us. And as you say, Caribbean strong, stronger together. So have a great one, Doc. See you until.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
What a way to end the series. Jeux Olympiques, a 4-part series that depicts all things the Olympics. Thought-provoking, educational, and most importantly, interactive. Dr. Sasha Sutherland, Regional Director for the Caribbean Regional Anti-Doping Organization, was our guest today. We want to say thank you, Jesus, for another opportunity to be able to educate people. We hope that it was a pleasure, a blessing to you all, and we wish you all a great success for the week. Please remember, guys, go out, register your children for Kids Connect. See you all next week for another episode of Futsal868 Corner Talks. Have a great one.